All right. I am okay. The recorder is on. Take one whenever you're ready.
Hey, I am John Hinkle with ShiftPrinciples.com, and you are listening to Vroom Vroom Veer with Jeff Smith.
Good job. I like it. Okay. I'm going to hit stop and I'll be right back.
Okay.
Are you ready to thoughtfully steer away from your revved up, frenzied, and far too often scripted life? Then welcome to Vroom Vroom Veer with Jeff Smith, where he guides you down the road differently traveled by sharing unique experiences with guests who have managed to shift away from a life stuck on cruise control and veered their way into a more authentic and fulfilling one in all sorts of interesting and kind of remarkable ways. Get ready to Vroom Vroom Veer with your differently traveled road chauffeur, Jeff Smith.
Joe Romm, thank you so much for being on Vroom Vroom Veer and welcome to the show. How's it going?
It's going great. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. You have an amazing resume, so this is going to be fun. I haven't had a whole lot of MIT graduates on the show, so thanks. So your new book is called How to Go Viral and Reach Millions. So talk a little bit about what you've got going on in this book. It's a book about persuasion, right?
It's a book about persuasion, and it's a book about how to get your message to break through in this world where we are, inundated on social media, the 24/7 news cycle, cable news. How do you cut through and get heard? It's like
Right.
the Niagara Fall of noise, and out
Yes.
there.
Yes.
And so I have been blogging for 12 years and have learned a great deal about what people will click on, what grabs people's attention,
Okay.
and what keeps it. And as the phrase I like to use is being clicky and sticky.
Right.
That's what you want.
Right. Right. Okay.
And that's been the goal of marketing and for thousands of years.
Yes. Thousands and thousands of years.
But now, because of social media and the internet, we have at our fingertips power to do messaging and test our messaging and see what works and see what doesn't work in real time. And the people who are doing that, they know what the winning messages are, and people who aren't availing themselves of the latest social science, the latest information about what goes viral and what doesn't, they're just guessing. And
Right,
so I
right.
sort of like to say, if you're not in the realm of the people who know what goes viral, you can be sure your competition or whoever is competing with you for the job or whatever it is. There's no situation where it isn't a good idea to be clicky and sticky. I mean, if you submit your resume, stack of 100 resumes, do I grab the attention? Do I keep it? If I
Right,
go out on
right.
a date, how do I be the person this other person remembers? So, and that's what persuasion is about. Ultimately, persuasion is the ability to have your words be the words that people remember.
Right. Right. And it turns out that some people in our government and definitely all over the world are working on these techniques, and they're very good at them. So if nothing else, we might learn some defense.
Well, I look, and I always say that every tool that humans have ever invented can be used for good or bad.
That's true. You're right.
And
It's neutral.
so
The tool
it
is
doesn't,
neutral.
and it's the same for language.
Right.
Right? I mean, you clearly have people who use language for bad purposes.
Right.
And you have, your Jesus and your Lincoln and your Martin Luther King.
Right.
So we're not. It's important to know what the people who would like to, let's say, manipulate you,
Sell you
are
something.
doing.
Yes.
And then, I think the big difference, of course, is whether we're going to use these techniques to persuade people of things that are true
Right.
versus whether we're going to use them and positive versus whether we're going to try to use these techniques to persuade people of things that aren't true and might result in harm or something like that. So, and obviously I'm a big fan of using this techniques to tell the truth, to sell a good product.
To sell the truth. We're at this point now where we actually, and I know you're a big climate change advocate, right? And, this could be like some of the most important ideas to sell and for us and future generations of humanity. So it couldn't really get more important.
Well, and that's how I came at this. That's how, even though, I have this PhD in physics from MIT,
right.
My short version of my story is I had been working in the area of clean energy at the Department of Energy, solar and wind power.
Okay.
And my brother lost his home in Hurricane Katrina. He lived in Pass Christian, Mississippi, and he, 1 mile inland, there was 20 feet of water that turned the inside of his house to like, the inside of a clothes dryer. And so he actually asked me, should he rebuild his home? Or were there going to be more storms like this coming? And so I spent talking to scientists, going to seminars, reading the science, and I realized two things. One of which was the situation was more, dire than I thought, but the other was scientists are not very good communicators.
Right. Yeah, I think we can agree on that. Yeah. Well, they're probably good communicators, yes. Also, not really good at selling ideas or persuasion.
Well, they're
Did
not
you come
good
out with that too?
Yeah, I mean, look, and we don't want everybody, to study sales, right? I mean, obviously, we'd like people to figure out which medicines are better cures than other medicines, and which pollutant, which things are toxic and which things are safe. So, but in that skill set, you don't learn how to communicate. And one of the things that I learned was that, in fact, I had been taught over the course of my PhD, actually the worst ways of communicating, which is to use big words and use a lot of numbers and be literal and fact-minded. Whereas we know, if you study social science or just, the history of communications, that the most effective communicators are the ones who tell stories, who connect emotionally.
Right.
And by the way, this one of the things I like to tell people, this isn't like some, radical idea. Jeff Bezos himself, in his 2018 newsletter to shareholders, said, we have banned PowerPoints at Amazon business meetings.
That's good.
Because people don't learn and remember things from bullets. They remember things from stories. So we're replacing that with 5 to 6 page narrative memos.
Wow. Oh, that's awesome.
And
yeah,
I was just awesome. And this is something that the business community is definitely waking up to. And so
waking up to, yes. Yeah.
And I had certain clues. There's a story I opened the book with. One big clue that I was doing it wrong came when my daughter was 3 and she started saying blah, blah, blah to me.
Wow. At age 3.
At age 3, and look, she picked up a lot of phrases, as kids do. So I had this view, okay, she could repeat things she heard if she used them correctly. So I asked her if she knew what blah, blah, blah meant. And she paused and said, it's when Daddy says something that doesn't matter. And I went, whoa, dang, she did know what it meant. So,
that's awesome.
And then I was,
wow. Check out the big brain on the 3-year-old.
Well, and I caught on that, she's hearing stories round the clock for 10 years, right? That they can watch the same movie, if you have a kid or kids, right, they'll watch the same movie 10 times in a row.
Wow. Yeah, sure.
So, and as it turns out, stories we have relied on stories. Before there was written language, right? We had 100,000 years of developing language, and the stuff that survived, the stuff that went viral over time were stories.
Right.
The stories that got passed down in the Bible or in the great heroes' journeys of the epic poems by, the Iliad and
like
the
oral
Odyssey.
tradition kind of thing, something that somebody could commit to memory because of the structure of the narrative.
Right. And those stories actually, over 100,000 years, our brains, the modern brain neuroscientists say our brains are actually wired for stories.
Right.
We like to hear things in stories form, and we like to tell things in story form. And that's what we remember. And so the key then became what's the best way to tell a story?
Sure.
And what is the form of a story that is most likely to go viral, is most likely to draw people in? And the simplest thing that I have in my book, the thing that the most people tell me, oh, this has changed the way I write or speak, is this rule of replacing.
Okay.
The rule of replacing, and it was developed by Hollywood screenwriters or put into language by Hollywood screenwriters, but it's been used, from Oprah Winfrey uses it, but Jesus used it, Lincoln
Donald
used
Trump probably uses it in his
Donald
tweets.
Trump, yes. And I in my book, How to Go Viral and Reach Millions, I talk about that. So this rule is very simple. You take what you've written, or you write out your speech, and you circle all of the ands, and wherever possible, you to try to replace an and with the word but or equivalents like yet, because you're trying to introduce the kind of conflict and narrative tension we expect in our best stories. And you're also then replacing and with therefore or equivalents like so to introduce the resolution of that conflict and tension.
Wow.
This is the famous 3-act story that goes back to the Greeks and long before, where we lay out the exposition.
Right.
There's the exposition, then there's the twist, and then there's the problem that needs to be solved, or the villain that needs to be defeated, and then there's the resolution. And all the stories have that. And so if we give talks that are just and, they're like lists of bullet points. I did this, and I did this, and I did this. People
it's about
tune
as
out.
exciting as a shopping list.
Right.
And your 3-year-old is saying blah, blah, blah.
Right. Or those old slideshows where someone tells you how their trip went. I went to here, I went to here, I went to here. Nobody,
Right.
We tune that out.
Snoozeville. Right.
Snoozeville. So if you want to grab people's attention, you got to get very quickly these days to the but. Because, and as a salesperson, if you're trying to market something, right, you are fundamentally trying to sell someone a solution to a problem they have.
Right.
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 It's either a problem they have or it's a problem they don't know they have. But one way or another, I mean,
Right.
Look, modern
They're making them up
advertising
now, right? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, modern advertising, like, you have restless leg syndrome.
That was exactly where my mind went immediately. Wow, you're like a magician. As soon as you said that, where they're making up like diseases. Yes.
Yeah, well, and maybe apparently people do have this. I mean, I once had a girlfriend. She used to kick me all the time and wake me up in the middle of the night.
Right.
Well, now I know, okay, some people have that.
Sure.
Now, apparently, there's a drug to sell you. But the point, but it doesn't even have, even Steve Jobs, if he created a variety of products that people didn't even know they needed.
Sure. They didn't know they wanted to have a music library in their pocket before the
They
iPod.
didn't know, right, because they didn't know it was possible.
Right.
Or, or as you remember, he was mocked when he came out with the iPad.
Okay.
And people said, who's going to need this? It's not as good as a laptop, and I still or as small as a phone.
Right.
And so the point is, yes, obviously there are problems that you have, like, I'd like to be more attractive.
Right, right.
I'd like to, be better, do a better interview, or write a better, give a better speech. So the point anyway is I'm here trying to sell you, I've got the solution to your problem. So the problem is the but, and I'm trying to convince you that I can solve your problem. I'd better tell a story of how I solved the problem.
Ah, right. Okay.
So that's the story. That's the equivalent of the hero's journey, or the super. When I'm doing a branding exercise with someone, trying to figure out how are they going to sell themselves as different from every other person trying to do the same sales.
Sure. You've got to get that button there.
So the question is, what's your superpower? What is it that makes you special? And what's the origin story? We never, half of all the movies today
are superhero stories.
Yeah, they're a Disney princess movie, and the Disney princesses go through this. And this story is basically, I was once like you, right? And then I had this problem. I hit a wall. Something bad happened, and then I was lost. I couldn't figure it out, and then I decided I'm going to figure this out. So it could be like someone has a divorce. It's usually like a big shock system. I got fired.
Right.
In fact, there's a great video I always send people to. A viral video that Steve Jobs gives to Stanford graduates, in which he tells the story of how he was fired. And younger people may not know this story, but at the age of 30, he was fired by his friends on the board,
right,
from the company that he created.
Right. Yes, I remember that. It's in the movie.
He says, this was the most crushing moment in my life. It's like my entire life had been building to develop this company, this Apple computer, and I did it, and here I am, boom. Suddenly, I'm fired from the board. My friends say, you're making this place worse.
Right. Wow.
And it was like, I just was about to give up. And anyway, he tells the story of how he reached bottom, and then he realized, but wait a minute, I know one thing, which I really love to do, this innovation and the design and and he said, ultimately, being fired was the best thing that happened to me, because it freed me up from this path that I was on, this journey that was really a dead end. And look, here's what I did. And then what did he do? Well, he launched Next, which was the company that became the platform when he was hired back by Apple for the modern Mac. But also, he bought a division of Lucasfilms,
right? Pixar,
turned into Pixar,
right? And
he reinvented animated storytelling.
Wow.
And created some of the greatest movies. Anyway, so he just tells this story. But the point is, he also learned the art of storytelling. So when you watch him go on stage and sell the iPhone,
right,
where he doesn't even come out by saying it's an iPhone. He says, I have 4 great products. It's a music library. It's a communications device. It is a way of connecting to the internet. And then he says, and then he says, but the amazing thing about it, it's just one device and it fits in your pocket.
Wow.
And so, and obviously he turned Amazon into the what's considered to be the most successful brand in history.
Right.
So,
and now that he's gone, it's like,
well, exactly. And he doesn't, there's nobody there who is
with the vision and telling stories.
Right. And so ruthless about the design has to be, user friendly,
right.
And if you have current Apple products, they're great products, but they clearly don't have the same thing.
Right.
And I love them. Anyway, the point is that this works for anybody, and you have to eventually you yourself are going to have to create this story of what got you to this point where suddenly you're in a position to solve someone else's problem. You're a mini superhero in the area of this problem, right? And I'm not a superhero, but I do know how to take whatever you're writing or saying and turn it into something that is much more likely to go viral, that is much more likely to grab people's attention and keep it.
There's like a format or a formula, right? That if you use it, you're just increasing your likelihood of going viral.
Right. And what I talk about in the book is this is I go way back here. I actually analyzed the Sermon on the Mount. I say, what's the most viral speech in human history? Well, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, there are 10 billion copies of the Bible published, and then there are all the
that's pretty viral.
It's pretty viral. And then, and plus that's not even counting the people who just attend church and hear it, So the point is, yes. But again, the Sermon on the Mount is written in a form where there are 99 ands, there's 29 buts, and 13 therefores. And that's because it was written. Preachers are a classic example of people who better be clicky and sticky.
Right.
I mean, they're speaking to a large audience.
Yes.
And
they're trying to persuade.
They're trying to persuade and
tell
keep
a story, right?
Yeah,
keep you interested.
And so preachers, Martin Luther King, Jesus, they don't talk that way because they're trying to, there's one reason alone, because over thousands of years, the preachers passed down the story traditions. They are the ones who had to learn this strategy because that was their entire, success is based on their ability to grab a crowd and keep it and persuade it.
Right.
So anyway, that's I talk about that in the book, and then, like I said, I try to get into these very specifics. What are they doing?
What are the rules, right?
What are the rules exactly? And one of the main rules. So rule number one, if you will, is you have to be communicating in story form.
That makes sense.
And the message you're delivering is in the story. And the story is written in a certain form. It's got the like I said, got the exposition. It's got the but. It's got the turn, the twist, and then it's got the resolution. The other key thing about winning stories and winning advertising headlines is that they use the figures of speech.
Okay.
And so the figures of speech are things like metaphor and irony and rhyme and alliteration.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
But there's 200 of them. They're not really taught very much anymore. Shakespeare knew 200 of them. The authors of the King James Bible knew 200 of them because back in the day, the reason why the works of Shakespeare and the King James Bible are the two most memorably quoted works in all of literature is because the Elizabethan era was the height of rhetoric being taught.
Gotcha.
And the figures of speech. So the point is that the figures of speech are quite literally the memory tricks that the ancient bards used to tell their stories so they could remember a 2-hour-long epic poem.
Wow.
And the listeners would remember it.
Okay.
And, of course, that's why modern bards, who is to say songwriters, right? The most viral things there are today are pop songs.
Yeah.
And
they'll stick in your head forever.
They stick in your head forever. And the number one most viral video online is still Despacito, more than 5 billion views.
Wow.
And again, this is the telling of a story using the figures of speech rhythmically. That was the other thing that
Rhythm,
the ancients learned.
Rhyme.
That rhyme,
Repetition.
rhyme, repetition, metaphor. All your great songs are built around metaphors. In fact, in the book, I actually list like the top 50 songs of all time, most viral songs, and over and over again, these songs are based on metaphors. And whether it's I like sometimes talk about Katy Perry, her song "Roar," her song "Dark Horse." You have Taylor Swift singing "Shake It Off."
All about the bass.
Well, all about the bass, exactly. All about the bass, and even the
There's actually a real story behind that I had no clue when I heard it.
Which is
well, the all about the bass, all about the bass, all about the bass, no treble means that she's got a big butt and no boobs.
Yeah, right. Yes, right. So it's an entirely metaphorical song.
Right. Exactly.
And yet one of the most widely downloaded songs of earlier era was Elton John's "Candle in the Wind."
Right.
His remembrance of Marilyn Monroe, which he then updated for Princess Diana.
Right, but it totally worked. There's another rule out there. I can't remember, what do they call it? It's like the thing where you change it fits this candle in the wind idea really well, because it's like you want to change a thing minimally, right?
Yes,
right. And then that's going to be like a new thing and huge, right? But if it's a totally out of the blue innovation, people don't care.
Right, and that is one of the reasons why metaphors work, because
they're minimally different. Right, it's like right. You're laying a thin veneer of new content over something that's old.
Right,
and known. Right.
Yeah, and that's
wow.
Why did I like to explain in the book. The book is a handbook on how to go viral and reach millions. And it's got a lot of specifics, as you know. But of course, I tell lots of stories because
you should. Yeah, that's part of the deal.
Kind of a book on, and I try to also use some of the modern social science, because some people, want to know the why.
Sure.
So why stories and metaphors? Why are they the thing that are so memorable? And the short answer is that our brains are the biggest energy consumers in our body.
Right.
And so we developed over 100,000 years all of these mental shortcuts for being able to not have to spend a lot of brain power figuring stuff out in important situations.
Right.
Right. So if you are like out in the wilderness with your group and they all start running in one direction, then are you going to sit around waiting for the thing to come that has scared them? Or might it be a good idea to just do what everyone else is doing? So if
I think you're going to be having that thought as you're running.
Exactly, because you're like, oh, why are they running? Why are they running? Oh, there's a lion. Now I see why they're running.
Right.
Too late.
Too late. Right. Exactly.
So there are many shortcuts we developed, and people have written books about that, and I talk about that a bit in the book.
Yeah, those all become those biases that we have, right?
Exactly. This is the work of Dan Kahneman, the first psychologist to ever win a Nobel Prize in economics. He invented behavioral economics, and behavioral economics is what are the ways – economics is built around the notion that people are rational, but nobody's rational.
Right. Yes.
And so what is the real world like? And that's what behavioral economics was about. So one of the biggest shortcuts, maybe the biggest shortcut for figuring out what I'm going to do in any situation is, do I know somebody the story of somebody who was in that situation and got out of it, or didn't get out of it. What did they do that was wrong? They didn't get out of it. So stories, we really want to learn stories, because stories are the thing that helps us figure out this perplexing world that otherwise, like, why are we here? All that, what are we supposed to do? It's not like there's a rule book.
Right.
But there is a rule book. The rule book are the stories that are passed down. And all of those stories, the ones that have morals, those are supposed to teach us lessons. Right. And that was
and
the
solve
whole
problems for us.
Teach lessons and solve problems. And that's what stories have always been for tens of thousands of years. And that's why we are programmed to really want to have stories, because the stories give us an arsenal of, okay, this girl smiled at me. What do I do? Okay, did I see? I don't know.
Right.
Except I've seen 100 movies, and the people who did this, who stuttered, and you see it all, right? And then I figure, and then of course ultimately we find characters that we identify with.
Right. I could be
Say,
that guy. Right.
Like The Rock, he is cool. I'm going to be like him.
Yes,
right? So
I'll strike a pose and raise my eyebrow.
Right. So we become a collection of stories that appeal to us. Or sometimes, of course, we say, ooh, I'm not going to be like that person.
Right. I don't want to be that guy. Right.
But the point is story, this, because bad things happen to this person. So we have programmed our brains, and that's what metaphors are, right? Metaphors are, here's a novel situation, but I'm comparing it to something that like, okay, how do I think about the complex concept of God? Okay, well, the Lord is my shepherd. Okay,
I know what a shepherd is.
Yeah, right, and the most famous psalm, is the 23rd Psalm.
Right. And
Jesus actually expands on that when he tells the story of the Good Shepherd. Right, Good Shepherd takes care of his flock.
Right.
Tends to them, doesn't abandon them. Shows them the way.
There's probably a lot of shepherds. That was probably a very popular occupation.
Exactly.
All right. So therefore, a useful metaphor. Right.
Yeah. Well, and of course, metaphors and stories have to be modernized. I actually I sometimes tell the story of, I took my daughter to see the Nutcracker Suite, because it's it's the beautiful ballet, and, young kids love it. They love the music. And then, like, at the intermission, she's like, so why is the Nutcracker such a terrific present? It's like, she's never used a Nutcracker in her life.
Right.
Right. So the point is, we do have to modernize these things. But,
right.
And that's the opportunity, of course, for modern salespeople. Right. I mean, we're in the business of sort of modernizing things, putting a new gloss on it, and persuading
adding
people.
that thin veneer of new content over stuff that's been around for 10,000 years.
Yeah,
or 2,000 years.
And that's another point of the book. You can try to reinvent the wheel when it comes to figuring out effective communications, but it was figured out many centuries ago.
Right.
And then I talk about in the book, I quote David Ogilvy from 1963, considered the father of advertising, and he just if you read Ogilvy, he just talks about a lot of these things that the advertising industry figured out. And one of the things, and they figured out that you want to use the figures of speech because they are memorable. And so that's why, 80% of advertising headlines have one or more of the figures of speech. And
there's lots of rhyming, lots of alliteration.
Alliteration is like the number one thing. And,
really?
Okay. And Dunkin' Donuts, okay,
sure.
that's Chevy is
and what was the Marvel guy, right? Almost all of his characters were an alliteration. I don't know.
Yeah.
Peter Parker, right?
Right.
You could go on and on and on and on and on.
Clark Kent, Lois Lane,
thank you.
Lex Luthor,
right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, and I use that example sometimes too. Superheroes they all have a brand. You ever notice there is no superhero that has infinite powers from day one, defeats everybody, and that's the story, right? Nobody's interested in that.
That's why Superman has always been a problem, really.
And that's why there's kryptonite.
Right, exactly. That's why there's kryptonite, because you have to come up with some sort of limiting factor on that guy, because he is literally all powerful, right? So if you don't have kryptonite, you don't have a story.
Right.
So that's why there always has to be kryptonite in every Superman
It's always
story.
kryptonite.
Right.
But of course, he does have another weakness, which the superheroes always have one more weakness.
Okay.
Which is they care about regular people.
Right. And the bad guys don't. Right.
So even though they're invulnerable, people they
bad
love
guys
to
will
be put in danger.
Right. Go
and
drop
that, of
Lois
course,
Lane off a building. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why the classic, and again, so once you understand this, then of course the stories write themselves. You need the origin story. How did the ordinary Peter Parker turn into Spider-Man?
Yeah.
And that's the same origins, So anyway, the point is that these stories, as you say, so what we have here is a story. It's told in a certain way. It's got a journey in it where people and of course Peter Parker has to learn a lesson. Right. That's the other point. And that's
when his uncle gets killed because of his arrogance.
Right. With great power comes great
responsibility. So good.
Right. So when I'm telling a story, right, and I'm as a salesperson, my story, if I'm trying to sell you a product, I can't come in and say, I know everything and you should listen to me.
Right.
That we're not interested in that person because we inherently distrust them.
Sure.
Right. We want to know what is the process that got this person from being an ordinary person like me into this mini superhero.
Right.
So that's the story. That's the hero's journey. And that's the story every good salesperson tells. And whenever you hear the politician who came from nowhere, Abraham Lincoln, right? Grew up in a log cabin, never got much of a real education.
Right.
It's always the same story. We're always hearing how our politicians, right? They came from the ordinary stock, first in my family to get a college education.
That's Oprah Winfrey. And Oprah is all over that, right? Right.
So, and I don't want to make fun of it because the immigrant story is the classic American story, right? My parents came here, they had nothing, couldn't speak the language, they worked 2 or 3 jobs, and they were able to put me through school. And I was bullied as a kid or whatever it is. Anyway, so and again, that was the other thing I kind of figured out writing the book was that, and of course I talk about my brother David and what he died unexpectedly, my oldest brother, right before I started writing this book, and I ended up having to plan his memorial. So I was reading all these eulogies. And I didn't realize how many people he had touched in his life. And so the point is that, and of course the word eulogy comes from EU, meaning good, as in euphemism or euthanasia, and logos, logos meaning word or speech.
Wow.
It's a good speech.
Words.
It's a good story, right? When someone dies, we tell good stories about them. Right.
Even if they're not a good guy. We
we don't speak ill of the dead, right? That's the famous saying. And we this is how we remember them. We remember them with stories.
It's amazing.
And the word logos is the powerful word from Greek that was in the Bible, the beginning of the book of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Yeah.
But word is a very poor translation of the word logos. Logos is really more like speech or story.
Wow.
And the story is God. The story was God, and the story was also told by God. So, and even that opening line, it's got the repetition. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So we're repeating Word and God a lot. People are going to remember what? 2 words, Word and God. And that's, of course, what the good news is, right? It's the good news.
What's the word? God.
and this is the it's the story, and this gets to the word news, right? Because we want something new. So the story,
and we don't want it to be fake.
No, we don't want to be fake. We don't want to be old. Right. So it's
because new is embedded in the word, right? What's
new is embedded in the word news, and of course that's where. Again, I was raised by a newspaper editor. It really was one of the reasons I was able to transition from being a scientist to being a writer and communicator, because newspaper business is all about, I need a headline that grabs you, and then I need a story that pulls you in.
So talk a little bit about how what do we do on headlines and Twitter posts to grab attention?
So headlines are just this, when people ask me, what is the single biggest mistake I am making in online communications? And the answer, you're not spending enough time on the headline.
Right. Like your blog post title or your whatever, right?
Yeah, because the headline, fundamentally, I can tell you, because I see all of our statistics, and that's the power of the internet and modern apps and big data. The average click-through rate on one of our headlines is maybe 4 or 5%.
Wow. Okay.
So that 1 in 20 people are not seeing anything more about our story than the headline.
Right.
So 2 things about the headline. And by the way, this is true of ad headlines. This is something Ogilvy says in his book from 1963. He actually says, only 1 in 5 people are going to read past the headline of your ad.
Right.
And he says, a good headline will give you 10 times as much sales as a bad headline, which, by the way, is why he wrote 17 headlines for every ad. And, of course, they would test. It was expensive. It took millions of dollars to do testing in the 1950s, right? Because you'd have to buy ads in newspapers or TVs or radio and run different cities or whatever. And it would take days or weeks. Now, of course, you can do A/B testing on Facebook. You can do testing on Amazon. Everyone's doing it,
right?
And we do it. But one of the points of my book is the basics of what you need to do after you do lots and lots of testing. You basically learn, I need to grab people's attention really fast, and I need to if I want something to draw people in, I have to appeal or spark an emotion, which are these emotions of sharing. And there has been a lot of studies, as you can imagine, by marketing and social science and companies. What are the things that trigger people to share? And it is certain emotions in particular do it. And I talk about the 3 main emotions, the 3 A's of anger, anxiety, and awe, AWE.
Right. Okay.
And anger is outrage. So we all know, we get bombarded with posts. Can you believe what so-and-so did? And it could be, can you believe what such and such a politician said or did? We get a lot of those in our inbox.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's also, can you believe what Kim Kardashian said?
Sure.
It's just whatever it is.
Can you believe, right?
Right. It's like, this is outrageous. I'm outraged. So outrage, anger, this triggers a lot of sharing. Then we have anxiety. So this is another classic headline. The 3 foods you shouldn't be eating.
Right. You need to know. You need to know. Yeah.
You need to, the 5 things you should never say in a job interview.
Right.
Oh my God, wait, am I saying one of those?
Right.
So this is a classic.
The 10 ways to have better sex. Everybody's got to click on that.
Right. So it can be done positively or negatively.
Okay.
Right. Or 10 things you're doing wrong that's turning your mate off.
Right.
Right. I can flip it positive or negative depending on, and I can, the nice thing is, these days they test. Do I get And maybe, and one of the points of testing, by the way, is maybe women will click on a different one than men will.
Interesting.
Right? The men might be motivated by what they're doing wrong, whereas the women, I'm just making this up, but it could be true, the women might be more motivated on what I should be doing better. So anyway, the point is that's another reason we test is because there is no one size fits.
Yeah, and I've noticed something, and I can run this by you. Like, I think for the longest time, I was just putting out statements or bullets as like Twitter posts for podcasts, right?
Yeah.
And I changed them because instead of giving the answer, I started just making them questions. So instead of saying like, this is what the guy said, I would write the question that elicited that response. And that was a lot more click happy. I remember one of the questions was, why are boomers afraid of companies like Valve and Zappos? Okay. And the question was answered in the podcast, but I kind of like fire and forget a lot. I'm kind of like a bad Twitter person.
Yeah.
So I've got a robot that does this evergreen repost kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I totally missed this, but there was this really long conversation that I wasn't a part of because I wasn't paying attention between the guest and Zappos.
That's funny.
It was funny. Yeah. So I went and liked it later, anyway.
And it's a good, what you described as a Twitter. I mean, a good headline is a good tweet. It's the same thing. Right. I mean, look, sure. Twitter, we get a lot of traffic from Twitter. We get a lot of traffic from Facebook. I get a lot of traffic from Google News and Google Search.
Right. That's where you put your headlines, right?
Yeah. Or ultimately Google, makes the decision. In other words, you can put in, you can do search engine optimization. You can put keywords in your headline, which you certainly ought to know how to do if you're in the business. But to actually, if Google itself gets excited, if they think that what you've written is clicky and sticky, then they're going to use it, stick it in Google News.
Right.
And, for me, going viral means, different things. Obviously, I'd like a high click-through rate of the people who come to our news site. But I also want content aggregators out there or people with Facebook posts or big Twitter feeds to read my headline and think, "Oh, that's sexy."
Right.
If I put that on my site, people are going to click on that. Mm-hmm. And that's why the difference between a good headline and a bad headline is so radically different. Because if I can cross that threshold of writing a clicky and sticky headline, now a lot of other people are going to do my marketing for me.
Right, because you're getting those share emotions, and you're invoking the sharing thing. That's what viral is.
Right, and that's just the same as a popular song, right?
Yeah, right. It's stuck in your head.
Stuck in your head, and you want to sing it, and then suddenly you're an advertisement for this song. Because you're like, I'm singing it, or I want to tell my friend this. You hear this great new song, and sharing is a tribal bonding exercise.
Interesting.
Right.
Yes.
We're sharing as a way of saying,
affirming our tribe membership. Right.
Right. You're gonna like this.
Right.
I like it. You're going to like it. I'm outraged by this. You're going to be outraged. I think
love this. I'm awed by this. Right.
Right. This is amazing. I didn't know that a cat could play the piano. And by the way, we go online, right? If I'm a cat person, I'm finding other cat people, right? If I'm a dog person, I'm finding other dog people.
Yeah.
I've got nothing against. I like dogs. I'm more of a cat person. I doesn't mean I don't like a cute puppy video, but gives me a cat. The people where you put a piece of tape that makes a square on the floor. I don't know if you ever saw that, but if you put if you own a cat and you put a square on the floor out of tape, your cat will go sit in the box. It's not a real box, but the cat doesn't know that. But anyway, there's all these videos of the fact that cats will do this really bizarre thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well, and again, so
and we wouldn't have known that if it weren't for YouTube. That's great.
Right, and so we are what we're doing, that's called the social media for a reason. Right. We are socializing with people who are like-minded, and we are finding out. And so when we share, we're trying to do two things. One of which is we're trying to share an emotion, share a feeling that's mutual. And this is our way of this is a bonding thing. It'd be like if someone were right next to you, it's saying something nice to them, or
right.
Right. But the other thing it does, we're getting a little social credit as being cool if we're first.
Right. Yes. Oh gosh, that's a huge thing.
Right. So and that's, by the way, that's true of every headline I write.
Right.
The stuff that if you want to go viral, you want to be first.
Right.
And
the
so
scoop.
Right, have a scoop. And of course, that's on the only downside on the internet is people are so obsessed with being first, they're not fact checking.
Right. Fact checking. What's that?
People like, I heard this guy said what?
Right.
And I'm spreading it around and say, well, turns out he didn't quite say that. It was kind of taken out of context.
Sure.
And if you look at what real, but anyway, so yes, and I'm trying to show I have a degree of coolness that I'm cutting edge. I know first that new song or that new video, or I'm the first one to send you those two dresses, the gold dress or the blue dress.
The new cool dress, yes.
And so that's or hey, did you see the trailer for the next Avengers movie? Whatever it is. So so this is as old as time, right? That's why it's called the good news, right?
Amen.
Go back to where we started.
Yeah.
If I have something new, it is immediately of interest. Oh, wow, I haven't heard this before.
Right.
So again, this is what I'm trying to be clicky and sticky is I am trying to promise you a story that one, you haven't heard before, and B, that's going to trigger that you're going to enjoy emotionally.
Right. And hopefully
and if
share.
If I can do that consistently, then I have a brand, and you will come back regularly. Because
right.
Hey, this is a guy, and everyone has a movie reviewer they like, or a columnist, or a singer, right?
Right.
Maybe you like Lady Gaga,
or a blogger, or a podcaster, or
right.
one. Yeah, right.
Right. Because they have a voice that resonates with us.
Yeah.
Presumably because some aspect of how they look at the world matches ours.
They're
and
like
again,
me. Right.
Right. They're like me, and therefore the stuff they like, I don't have time. This is when I was when I was thinking of how I'm branding my climate site. My job is you can't read everything on climate change on the internet.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But I can. I mean, I can't read everything, but I can sift through everything and pull out the stuff that you really need to see, or summarize it, or say this is a waste of time, or say, hey, this is a great video.
Let me do the work, and I'll explain what it means.
Right. So I become the one-stop shop. And most of the successful brands are people like Amazon. You don't have to go anywhere else. Right. I can sell you anything at a great price and get it to you faster
and free.
And free, right? Well, once and that's the beauty of the network effect, right? Is once I become good, if I can beat people to the punch, and suddenly start to get an audience, then more people are going to come because it's like, oh, if 100,000 people are here, then this must. That's how I'm figuring out. That's the last thing we need to know as a tribal person.
Right.
If 1,000 people, if 1 million people clicked on this video, then I don't have to worry, I might be wasting my time. So we're always trying to get some piece of information that says we're not wasting our time by clicking on this link.
Amen.
And so if it's got 1 million likes or whatever it is, that's a clue. So again, anyway, as you know, you've read How to Go Viral and Reach Millions. I try to explain the things that basically will work and make things more likely to go viral. And you can apply this to giving a speech and being remembered. You can apply it to writing a tweet. You could apply it to the subject line in an email or in a story you're writing or telling.
So the book is called How to Go Viral and Reach Millions. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, the easiest way to get the book, of course, is Amazon.
Okay.
And you can go on Amazon and Google How to Go Viral. I mean, not Google,
I will
but
link to it in my show notes. That'll be easy.
yeah, and I advertised. I bought some keywords on Amazon to make sure that if people are like, "Hey, I heard something on a podcast once about what was it? Go viral."
Yeah.
So you type in "go viral." I will show up in the main one, but I'll also show up in the sponsored content.
Cool.
So that's the best way. If you want to contact me, you can go to the website rhetoric.com. You'll learn a little more about the book. Anyway, I just sent people to Amazon because why make them do another extra click?
There you go. Perfect. Thank you, Joe. This has been a blast. I appreciate you hanging out with me.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeff.
Thanks for taking the time to ride along with us on another episode of Vroom Vroom Veer. For podcast info and show notes, be sure to head over to vvveer.com. That's VVER.com. Man, that's fun to say. And we'll catch up with you next time here on Vroom Vroom Veer.